power, choice, and who really wins when streaming consolidates. Today, we're going to walk through how the Warner Brothers Discovery deal came together, why it exploded into a hostile bidding war, and why Warner Brothers recently flat out rejected Paramount's latest offer, and why regulators are now circling. Then we'll zoom out and talk about what this actually means for consumers, pricing, content, and creativity, and how we'll know whether this merger makes things better or quietly worse. Because at the center of all this is one question: what happens when the world's biggest streamer tries to become the world's most powerful studio? That's exactly what Netflix is attempting by buying the studio behind Harry Potter, Batman, and Game of Thrones. And whether this deal will succeed or collapse could redefine the future of streaming. I'm Jeff Galak, a professor at Carnegie Mellon's Business School, and you're watching Galak Breaks It Down, where I provide the key insights into the latest business and global news. Today, we're talking about Netflix's proposal to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery. This story really begins last month, when Warner Brothers Discovery's financial stress finally collided with the new reality of streaming. In 2024, Warner Brothers posted a net loss of roughly $11.5 billion, largely due to write-downs tied to its declining linear TV networks. Those problems persisted into 2025 with weak cable advertising, sluggish streaming growth, and a balance sheet carrying roughly $34 to $35 billion in debt. By late fall, Warner Brothers had become a classic motivated seller. In early December of 2025, reports surfaced that Netflix had been quietly working with banks to structure a bid. On December 5th, the deal was announced. Netflix would acquire Warner Brothers Discovery's film, television, and gaming studios, HBO and HBO Max, DC Entertainment, and its distribution and licensing units. At the same time, the linear cable networks would be spun off into a separate company called Discovery Global. Netflix would assume about $10.7 billion of studio and streaming debt, valuing the deal at $82.7 billion. That's when things escalated, though. Within days, Paramount Skydance launched a hostile all-cash bid for the entire Warner Brothers Discovery company, including the linear networks, at a staggering $108 billion valuation. Over the past several weeks, the bidding war has dragged on publicly. And just days ago, Warner Brothers' board made its position unmistakably clear. It formally rejected Paramount's revised offer, calling it riskier, more heavily levered, and less certain than the Netflix transaction. If this deal goes through, Netflix wouldn't just be the largest streamer, it would become the first true streaming supergiant. Netflix already serves more than 300 million subscribers globally. Warner's HBO Max and Discovery Plus add roughly another 128 million. Together, that's more than 400 million people consuming content from a single corporate ecosystem. And this isn't just scale, it's content power. The combined library would include Harry Potter, DC's entire superhero universe, Game of Thrones, Looney Tunes, and decades of film and television history. Netflix wouldn't just distribute culture, it would increasingly own it. Many analysts now describe this as the transition from a chaotic streaming war to a more concentrated world dominated by three players: Nefflix-Warner, Amazon Prime Video, and Disney+. Fewer giants means fewer buyers for content, less leverage for creators, and higher barriers for new entrants. It also forces regulators into a defining moment. Netflix has always positioned itself as the disruptor of old media. This deal flips that story. Netflix is now the consolidator, and the question regulators face is whether vertical integration, platform, studio, and library under one roof crosses a line in digital media. The answer here will echo far beyond streaming. From Netflix's perspective, the strategy is clear. Subscriber growth is no longer the main game. Netflix now cares about engagement, pricing power, and profitability. That's why it's leaning into ads, tiered pricing, and efficiency, and why it stopped emphasizing quarterly subscriber counts. Owning Warner's intellectual property gives Netflix a reliable engine of globally recognized franchises. It strengthens its ad business, reduces reliance on licensed hits, and makes price increases easier to justify, because canceling will now feel more painful. For Warner Brothers, this is a reset born out of necessity. Linear TV is shrinking faster than expected. Spinning off the cable networks into Discovery Global isolates the weakest assets and much of the structural decline. From the board's perspective, Netflix offers certainty, speed, and a cleaner balance sheet outcome. Paramount's counteroffer tells a different story. Its argument is that regulators shouldn't allow Netflix to become this dominant, and that a Paramount-Warner combination preserves competition by creating a stronger alternative. But that vision depends on aggressive cost cutting. Cost savings excite investors, but they usually mean fewer shows, fewer jobs, and less creative risk-taking. So what does this all mean for consumers? Let's start with pricing and subscription fatigue. A combined Netflix HBO Max service becomes almost unavoidable. Prestige drama, blockbuster franchises, kids content, and global originals all live in one place. And when something becomes that essential, people tend to tolerate higher prices. That's loss aversion at work. The emotional cost of canceling feels bigger than the extra dollars on your bill. And there's a backdrop to all of this that matters. Streaming prices are rising across the board. Over the past year, almost all major players have hiked their subscription costs for standalone plans, bundles, and premium tiers alike. Average US households are now spending roughly $70 a month on streaming, about $22 more than a year ago. Even consumers who keep their services are feeling the pinch, often rotating subscriptions to manage costs. This streamflation adds another layer of pressure on consumers, just as consolidation pushes more content into fewer platforms. Next is the difference between quantity and variety. One app may offer more titles, but real choices come from competition among platforms with different creative strategies. As power concentrates, studios gravitate towards franchises and sequels with predictable global appeal. The mid-budget, experimental, or culturally specific projects are often the first to go. There's also cultural power. A single company with this reach gains enormous influence over which stories get funded, which voices are amplified, and which regions receive investment. Over time, that can tilt entertainment towards safe global hits and away from local storytelling. Labor matters too. Consolidation shifts bargaining power away from creators. Fewer buyers means fewer greenlights and weaker negotiating leverage. Consumers don't feel this immediately, but over time it shows up as thinner content slates and fewer breakout originals. So is a Netflix-Warner merger actually going to be good for us? For Netflix? Or for the broader economy? And maybe the hardest question of all, how would we even know if this was the right decision? In a deal this large, the answer depends almost entirely on what we choose to measure. Metrics aren't neutral. They reflect priorities. If the only scoreboard is revenue growth, operating margins, churn, and debt reduction, then success will look great on paper, even if consumers, creators, and competition are quietly worse off. One place to start is the household subscription stack. Those financial indicators matter, but they're table stakes. They tell us whether the company is healthier, not whether the market is. After the merger settles, how many streaming services does the average household actually keep? If Netflix-Warner grows while other services disappear, that's not just consumer preference, that's consolidation in action. Even if prices don't spike immediately, fewer viable alternatives mean less competitive pressure over time. Another critical lens is content diversity. Are we still seeing a healthy mix of big budget franchises, mid-budget originals, niche genres, international storytelling, and first-time creators? Or does the catalog slowly tilt towards safe, repeatable global franchises? A shift towards sequel-heavy, IP-driven content isn't just a creative choice, it's a signal that risk is being squeezed out of the system. And then there are the unintended consequences. Piracy is one of the earliest warning signs of consumer stress. When prices rise, choice narrows, or people feel boxed in. Piracy tends to creep back, not because people suddenly love breaking rules, but because they feel the system is no longer fair. That's a behavioral response, not just a legal one. Finally, watch the creative labor market. How many distinct writers, directors, showrunners are actually working year to year? Are opportunities expanding or contracting? Fewer working creators today doesn't just affect Hollywood, it shows up later as thinner slates, fewer risks taken, and fewer breakout hits for audiences. So whether this deal is a success isn't something we'll learn from a single earnings call. We'll see it in the texture of the market. How many choices consumers really have, how varied the stories feel, how healthy competition remains, and whether people still feel this ecosystem is working for them, not just for shareholders. This deal represents a turning point in streaming. The era of land grab growth is ending. Competition is narrowing, and the biggest players are shifting from fighting for subscribers to buying entire ecosystems. Netflix's evolution from disruptor to consolidator shows a familiar pattern. Platforms break old systems, then slowly begin to resemble them. For consumers, the real question isn't whether your bill goes up a few dollars. It's whether a small number of global companies end up deciding which stories get told and how much cultural choice we actually have. As always, thanks for joining me on Galak Breaks It Down.